opportunity, Hamish threw a punch toward Niall's bare midsection that connected with a loud, fleshy thud. Niall returned the blow with a combination of right fist and left elbow to his opponent's ribs. Hamish grunted and danced out of the way. Both wearing breeches and naked from the waist up, they were covered in perspiration and dirt. A swim in the loch would be in order once the match ended. "Is it Fenella, then?" Hamish asked with a grin. "She looks like she's about to set that poor lass on fire." Niall grunted, his eyes shifting to where Fenella, his long-time friend and more recently housekeeper, stood glowering at the unsuspecting girl. Her dark eyes met his, and she stalked away, back toward the castle. She was not fond of his brawling, as she called it, but what Fenella didn't understand was that Niall needed the fights. He needed them to keep uglier things at bay. His left arm twinged as if in response, the rounded end of the stump at his wrist covered by a snug leather glove. He'd designed the covering himself, one of many he'd worn since losing his hand more than a decade ago. But the loss had never held him back, especially in a fight. The crowd had grown thicker, Niall noticed, with many more females than would be expected for such an exhibition. His lips curled into a smile as he flung a wet clump of hair out of his face. Once he'd have thought they would come just to see the one-handed son of the Duke, the cripple of Maclaren, but from the rosy looks on the women's faces as they eyed his glistening muscled chest and arms, he'd wager the last thing they were thinking about was his missing left hand. Satisfaction rolled through him, costing him another well-placed blow from Hamish before he stepped neatly out of the way of a second. "Lucky shot," he said with a grunt, and paid back in kind with a jab to Hamish's thick jaw. "Eh?" the man said, dancing forward, sweat pouring off him in sheets. "You seem distracted, my friend. Mayhap some wenching is in order to cure whatever ails you." "You think about women far too much," Niall replied, with a punch thrown in for good measure, ducking a swift counter-blow. "And you dinna. Look at them," he said, waving a drenched arm to the boisterous crowd. "They'll want you." Niall's eyes narrowed, seeing that look on his friend's face and feeling his temper start to boil. "Hamish," he said in warning. "You could have your pick of the lasses," Hamish went on. "Enough. If you weren't still pining over the one who—" The red haze Niall fought to keep contained threatened to break free of his rigid control. "I'm warning you, Hamish. Keep your bloody mouth shut." The block-headed man didn't take the hint. "Left you?" Niall didn't pause to think, he just reacted. His knuckles and knee crashed out, connecting with flesh and bone in rapid succession. He ducked and weaved, his right fist and left elbow flying out in punishing sequences, driving Hamish back until he was nearly upon the people forming the far end of the circle. Blinded by rage, he swept Hamish's feet from beneath him. The man's thick arms did nothing to block the force of the blows that had been forged in the depths of hell, from years of pain and betrayal. "I yield! I yield!" It took half a dozen men to pull him off Hamish, for the bloodlust to clear, and for him to understand that his friend had fairly yielded the match. Everyone was cheering, his clansmen watching him with pride. He remained undefeated, though he took no pleasure in the fact. He'd lost control. Niall's skill in the ring was well known, but he never lost hold of himself. Never. Not since— hell. He drew a strangled breath as Hamish rose and spat a mouthful of blood to the earth. One eye was swollen shut, and his face looked like it had been trampled by a herd of cattle. "'Twas wrong of me," was all he said, but the pity in his friend's good eye was impossible to ignore. Niall staggered back from it, panting like a wild animal. No one spoke as he reached for a nearby skin and drank deeply. He passed a second skin of whiskey to Hamish, who accepted the silent peace-offering. They clasped arms and moved to 2 tree stumps on the edge of the clearing where they sat, breathing hard. The crowd closed ranks to watch a new pair of fighters face off. "I almost had you," Hamish said with a jovial grin. Niall shot him an incredulous look. "In your dreams you almost had me, and dinna think I didna ken 'twas you who invited the maid. She has the look of a MacLeod." Hamish had the grace to look sheepish. "Aye, about the lass, I didna mean—" "Think nothing of it," Niall said.